All right, welcome back for another presentation here. And we're going to be going over system services. Again, this is one of those ones where I'm going to expose you to what system services are. I'm going to give you a bunch of states and definitions. I don't expect you to remember all this. What I do expect you to do is make a note or a citation, whatever you got to do, for knowing that one, these exist, and then two, where to find it. So I'm going to have a hard time creating a scenario where the system service in terms of the state is going to tell you exactly what you need to do. Typically, it's a clue or a piece of the puzzle to whatever problem you're trying to solve. So I do not have one of those scenarios right offhand, but this is a tool that you definitely will need. It's kind of like having a torque wrench around. You don't really need a torque wrench until you really need a torque wrench. Okay, so with that said, let's get into the presentation, and then keep in mind that there's going to be a lot in here. You don't have to memorize it. Just remember that it's here and that system services are a thing. And when you run into a scenario where you're going to need to understand what the state actually means, go look it up. Okay? So history. Linux in general has went through a handful of iterations. Okay? So initially it was sysvint, okay, which was your system kernel essentially. So this version was based off of run levels, meaning that some of the services started before others. This was naturally slow because you're creating hyper dependencies on each and every service, and then if a service didn't run that was dependent, that was it, right? The rest of the sequence didn't start. Okay, so and then one of the major downsides here, because everything was dependent on each other, if a service was started, you lost the network because it was dependent on other services. All right, does that make sense? Hopefully it does. System D solved most of those problems, and it is your current system for your Linux kernels. Okay, so for the most part, you don't have to worry about the old problems. System D naturally has its own issues, but at the time being, it's probably the best solution that we have at the moment. Okay. So a daemon, I've used this term a few times. We ran into it a little bit up to this point. A daemon is a system service. Okay, it runs in the background, and it comes from the Latin word for Greek mythology term for genius or deity regarded as a good spirit or angel. It's meant to help you, and it does. For a system service, right, HTTP is something that is there to help you, and it runs in the background, and it just kind of works, right? And anytime it doesn't work, well, it becomes front and center that that protocol, that thing existed. But if you're a normal person, you're a normal user, that person is going, well, I clicked on the thing, I did what I always did, why doesn't this work? When you and I should be able to go, okay, well, it's probably a protocol, it's probably networking devices, it's probably something, right? There's a lot going on in the background to get that button click to work, to get to a social media site. There's a lot going on there, a lot of places to fail. So a daemon is something that works in the background, and it's a system service. Okay, just like the example I gave 4 seconds ago, the D at the end of a service that looks like a service, so something that you definitely recognize. And if you're a web developer, you've definitely heard of HTTP. All right, and then the D at the end of it stands for daemon, so it's a background service. System services, common ones. There's a lot more than this, but obviously this is what you're going to see quite a bit. So if you need the service files for particular services, this is the command for it. System control, list unit files at service. Obviously, this is a screenshot. There's a lot more than just this, but this is what it looks like. Okay? And this is part of the reason why there's so many people that are fans of command line. Can you go find this in the GUI? Sure. Yes. It's so much easier to do it this way, though, because you just have to run this command and it's going to work. It's going to get you all your services. So, yeah, command line is super helpful at times too. And I made the argument in a few videos ago that GUI is helpful for finding or discovering things that you don't necessarily, if you get close to the right area, a GUI can go a long ways to helping you find that last little bit. This is the exact opposite, where it's going, okay, if you know exactly what you're doing, it's going to save you a ton of time. Okay, so there's a good example when command line is really good. All right, system control, list unit at service. Okay, so we're not listing the file now, we're actually listing the service. Here we go. Notice that there's a handful of these that have the D at the end of their service. There's another one, there's one, there's one. Right, background services. I would like to see all of this be daemons where they have a clear separation between a background service and a normal service, but we don't have that. Okay, so the next few slides is what I was talking about earlier in the beginning of this presentation, where it's a series of states, a series of conditions. I don't expect you to remember all these, and I'm not even going to test it. But I do expect you to remember where to find the answer if you need to know what something means. Okay, so stop a service. Here's your command for that. Check the status. Here's your command for that. And obviously it's going to be the same thing for the rest of the slide. Moving on. States. Loaded. Here's your definition. Now, to be clear, guys, I did this because the docs for this is not very good. So I pulled it offline, I parsed it for you, and it makes it a lot easier thinking about it like this. Okay? Give you a few more seconds on this slide. Status. Unit types. Unit types 2. And that's going to be it for this one. So, obviously there's a lot of definitions in there, and obviously I didn't read off of the slides. And if you noticed, I don't have them memorized either, okay? So what I'm trying to get across here is understand where, well, first, understand that you're not going to remember them all because you're not going to use it enough, period. Just go look it up, right? Google is a thing. We need to get you guys to a point where you are functionable solving problems. That is our primary goal, right? We are trying to instill the skill of problem solving. And there's still a lot of students that try to make everything a procedure. And we understand the environment that you came from before, but we have to be able to get you to be able to problem solve, okay? So, and this is one good way of doing it. Focus on the concepts, focus on the high level issues that you need to remember, and then when you're trying to get something to work, understand that those concepts are going to aid you in that problem solving. So, and I'll give you an example. If you know that you change the firewall to allow for a secure shell, SSH, and it's not working, the very next thing you should do is to make sure that the firewall is on, make sure it's enabled, and then if those things are both true, okay, then you can move on to something else. But it should be the firewall. Well, the last thing you should do is make sure SSH is on and you have an SSH server, right? As soon as you get through those things and the SSH server is on and it's working and the firewall is configured properly, then you have a problem, because you just went through all the easy things that would block SSH connections. So that's an easy example of what we mean by troubleshooting, where if you understand the scenario, if you understand the concepts, then you can go, okay, all of these have to be true for this to work, so let's go ahead and go check them. All right. With that said, that's going to wrap it up for this video, and I will see you in the next one.